Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay, good morning. Good Erev Shabbos, everyone. Given the fact that we are now in the middle of Sfiras Omer, of counting the days of the Omer, I wanted to reflect a little bit about counting in general and perhaps connecting counting the Omer to counting the days of the young Jews and old Jews and children and old people that are held in captivity. And we count the days since October 7th. And people do count those days. As Jews, we count a lot. We count every day of the week. Hayom Yom, Rishon LaShabbos, Hayom Yom, Shishi LaShabbos. We count days towards Shabbos. We count for a minyan. In Chumash, the Jewish people were counted many times by Moshe Rabbeinu, Sefer Bamidbar. They were counted to know how many would serve in the army, how many were in each shevet in order to determine how large a chelek of Eretz Yisrael they would get, tribe by tribe. There's a lot of counting going on. We count, a nida counts a certain number of days, a zava counts days, a person who was tamei mace counts days. There are a tzaras. There are many, many different types of tumatar which involve counting. So I'm thinking a great deal about counting, what role it plays, and how we can understand it a little bit better. Whatever day it is in the Omer, today is 24, add 200, and you have the number of days that Israeli hostages have been in the hands of Hamas. And many people publicly count the days of captivity. And I want to look at the two sets of numbers. They share two digits, but they're very, very different ideas are implied or signified in these different countings. And I want to perhaps explore several different approaches that relate to these two counts, Shiur Omer and counting the days of imprisonment by the hostages. The obvious difference right off the bat, of course, is that Sfiras Omer is a fixed number. We know it ends 50 days later. We count 49 days, then we celebrate Shavuos. We've been counting 224 days. We look forward to celebrating their return, but we don't know when we'll stop counting. We don't know when that will be. The Or Sameach, Rameir Simcha of Dvinsk, in his Meshach Chochma, points out something about Sfiras Omer, which makes it fundamentally different from counting days in captivity, I think. He says counting is generally reserved for situations where there is a status change in the beginning of the count. For example, a nida or a zava counts a certain number of clean days as a way to mark off a difference between current clean days and previous days where there may have been an impurity or a sighting of blood. And each day of the count represents another day when a new status begins and the old status has not reappeared. That's the counting for a nida or a zava. There is no status change that is being counted during Sfiras Omer, a very different type of counting. So the counting is of a very different nature, different type. We simply count for the sake of counting. And that is why the halacha requires sfira b'peh. We have to enunciate. We actually have to count orally those days. The counting of days of the hostages' captivity is, I guess you can call it an ordinary count, the count of status change. Because for 224 days, they've had no freedom. They haven't seen their families haven't seen them. We don't know what kind of living conditions they're in, or in fact, how many are alive or are no longer alive. Every day that is counted is another day that their status has not changed. That's a radical difference in our counting. We count days so glibly. In shul, the rabbi counts, and we all count afterwards. Now we go home. We have to reflect on the nature of counting. I am sure the hostages and their families and all of Klal Yisrael are counting every day, hoping it's the last day of the count. But we don't know. Sfiras HaOmer is not a countdown. We aren't counting down the days to Shavuos, to Matan Torah, but in fact, we are counting up. We're counting up to a goal. Where we started is also important. So what is our starting point for Sfiras Omer? The Torah says, "Usfartem lachem mimacharas haShabbos miyom haviachem es omer hatinufa sheva shabbosos tmimos tiyena." So there's a fixed number of days, 7 weeks, no longer. And we begin mimacharas haShabbos, or perhaps the Pasuk also says miyom haviachem. So which is it? Mimacharas haShabbos, the second day of Pesach, or Miyom Haviachem es otomat hatinufa, from the day that we bring the Omer offering. Now they both happen to be the same day, but there's two different lashonos being used, and this also can affect the whole machlokas whether or not Sfiras HaOmer is Doraisa or D'Rabbanan. If it's Doraisa, then we don't need the Korban HaOmer to have Sfiras HaOmer. The starting point is Mimacharas HaShabbos, second day of Pesach. If Sfiras HaOmer is the Rabbanon, then it's contingent upon the Korban HaOmer. And since we don't have Korban HaOmer anymore, the whole obligation, the whole Shiur, is rabbinic. And therefore, the starting point is Miyom Haviachem es Omer HaTenufa. So again, there's a lot of Torah we could talk about in terms of Sfiras HaOmer. On a drush level, for example, we could say that our post-October 7th world is a very different type of Macharas HaShabbos. The massacre did occur on Shabbos, but what really comes to mind, at least in my mind, we say the Kina, the first Kina on Tisha B'Av. Shavas Suru Meni, where Shavas means everything came to a halt. After the Churban, people practically stopped living. Everything stopped. Well, after this Churban, things stopped too. Many lives have stopped or shifted in many significant ways since October 7th. The families, the captives themselves. For those who were in the area affected by the events of October 7th, some may have returned to daily routines, but many have not. We owe it, I think, to the hostages to continue counting and davening in a way that represents tamimos. Tamimos means we don't skip a day. Not a day goes by without seriously thinking about the plight of those who are missing. So that means that when you count, when we count Sfiras HaOmer, too often it's a very glib counting. We don't really focus on what the Omer is. We don't really focus on what the counting is. This is a general issue about kavanah of davening in general. But we count the days since October 7th. I think it behooves us to have kavanah. We're sitting here comfortably in Fair Lawn, and we know where our next meal is coming from. We know what we're going to have on the menu for Shabbos. we celebrate, we go about our lives, our routines really haven't changed all that much. But that isn't true for those held in captivity. The Sphira, when we count Ha'omer, Sfiras Ha'omer every night, we should think about counting these days and what it means. We don't know where they are. Are they in a dark tunnel someplace? Have they not seen light for so many hundreds of days? We don't know. And I think the two countings have to be together. We have to be conscious of it. Consciousness of when we do mitzvos is a very important ingredient. If the starting point is bringing the Omer, Miyam Haviachem es Omer Hatinufa, so the word Omer is a very interesting choice of words. The Torah describes the Korban by using Omer, and the Chachamim use the word Omer to describe the mitzvah. After all, what an Omer is basically a measurement of grain, 2.5 quarts, whatever the actual measurement is. So why do we place such emphasis on the word Omer? So the word Omer could be related, if you want to look at the Shoresh, Ayin Mem Resh. We have the words, when it talks about a person who was kidnapped. V'samer bo umacharo. He kidnapped him and he sold him. So his amer bo means a form of subjugation. For Sfiras HaOmer, the message might be that we are supposed to see the Korban HaOmer as a sign, perhaps, that we are meshubad to Hashem. We are dependent on Hashem for everything. And I think that we count the Omer to signify that message, that we are looking forward to a day when that will be restored. Mehero Yibana HaMikdash. But it's an understanding of the word, of our relationship between us and Hashem. Hashem didn't take us out of Mitzrayim to live a life free of responsibility. He took us out basically to observe his mitzvos. There's a famous Ma'amer in the Gemara. Al tikra cherus ela chorus. Don't regard your exodus from Egypt as an act of freedom, but basically it's an act of chorus, of our being subjugated to Hashem in the ways that were engraved, chorus, on the luchos. So it's not freedom, that's chorus. That it's an obligation that we took upon ourselves to serve Hashem. And in a certain sense, if we interpret Omer as a form of subjugation, then when we count the Sphira, and among the many kavanos we can have, and there are a lot of Kabbalistic discussions about what each day represents, but we should take time to reflect on the definition of Omer in terms of subjugation, and reflect perhaps on our own freedom and how we use that to serve Hashem, and the fact that not all people are free the way we are. According to Tosfos, the very famous Tosfos, the Gemara Menachos, that Sfiras Omer's status today is midrabanan. And we hope that we say Harachman Yachsna Beis Hamikdash B'Meira V'Yameinu. We, after counting the Omer, we say a prayer that Hashem should rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. The goal is that we think about the fact that there is something lacking in this mitzvah. And if we had a Beis Hamikdash, we could fulfill this mitzvah right. We could bring the Korban HaOmer. So, like everything else that we do on a regular basis, it's difficult to have kavanah for every mitzvah that we do. We spoke about it Wednesday in terms of Shemona Esrei, how difficult it is to have kavanah for the entire davening. But everything we do requires a certain modicum of focus, of understanding of what it is that we're doing and why we do it. And paying attention to the nuance of Sfiras Omer for all 49 days can be a challenge. Let's face it, it's difficult to have kavanah for any mitzvah. 49 days counting. Each day has a different significance. And to have in mind all the different nuances is hard. But then again, schwer zu sein Yid, as they say, being Jewish comes with certain obligations that are not always easy. When we long for the Beis HaMikdash, and we say that prayer after each day after each counting, perhaps it's stronger on the 25th day than it is on the first day. We're getting closer to Matan Torah. But whatever it is, whatever day you're counting, wherever you are, concentrating on these efforts for each day that we count the Yomer is, I think, very, very important. Similarly, after so many days of captivity, 224 days and counting, let's be honest, it's difficult to pray with the same intensity today that we did in November. And I think we have to dig a little deeper to find meaning, not only in Sfiras Omer, but in the counting of the days of captivity of our brethren in Israel. We hope that we can finally end this count and celebrate the return of all the hostages, B'mheira v'yameinu. This is just, again, a few random thoughts on the notion of counting, the difference of counting for Sfira, which has a finite end, and the counting of days of captivity, where unfortunately we don't know where it will end. But my plea is that we take the counting more seriously, and we try to inject a little bit more kavanah and not do this counting by rote, as sometimes we fall into the habit of doing.
I'm calling to confirm an appointment
Wally,
of a
I want
follow-up
to
on
that.
my
Yes, Julie.
epidural.
are you gonna spend some time
yesterday
mentioning whether it's
with
Bur
Dr.
Ola, Beis
Pavel.
Lamed,
I believe
Bur
I have an
Omer, La
appointment
Omer?
On May 29th with
Okay.
Dr. Pavel at 11 o'clock.
There is interesting
but,
machlokas, whether we count so many days, Ba Omer or La Omer. Ashkenaz and Sfard have two different nuschos. Usually when you make a bracha, it's to do something, lehadlik ner, and so forth. Either way, you can't go wrong. It's interesting. We count in Nusach Ashkenaz so many days la omer, but everybody says lag ba omer. Nobody says lag la omer.
La makes sense because you're reaching a goal, I'm sure.
Okay.
You're going towards.
So again, you're going towards something, and that's why Nusach Ashkenaz accepts La Omer, and that's how we have in our Sidurim, and Nusach Sfard goes with Ba Omer, and you can find examples of that in different types of brachos also. But usually it's La Omer, and it's anticipating a conclusion. Hopefully, the captives will also find the same conclusion.
Rabbi.
Yes.
So just going back to what you said about it's hard to have kavana all the time and everything. That's no chiddush, obviously, because there's the whole concept of keva and kavana.
Right.
Like, even if you're not in the mood or you don't have the kavana, we're mechuyav, and so that's the keva part. You daven even lo mitchashek lecha, or whatever, because hopefully that might cause the development of kavana on that particular time. It may not, but at least you're conscious of your achrayut to do that.
Well, consciousness is a key word. If you are aware of what you say, if you understand the words, even the simple meaning of the words, then you can't help but not have. You have to have kavod if you understand what it is you're saying. And again, the Gemara, the Rambam say that if you don't daven with kavod, you got to do it all over again because you're just mumbling words without any efficacy, no meaning to So kavana is very, very important, and it's just I'm making a plea that even if it means davening less, but what you do daven should have more meaning to it. So if you can't keep up to the speed that the shul is davening, do less, but do it better. I think that would be an important thing. Nathan, you had a question.
Yes, Wally. Usually when we're anticipating something, we're counting down to the days that come along. And I know this question's been asked many times. If we're anticipating Matan Torah, why are we not counting down the days instead of counting up the days?
Okay, well, again, it might just be a grammatical difference in meaning, but we're leading up to something. You know, again, it's how you view it. A count, again, they're both very similar. There's a countdown until something happens, but the countdown refers to the event itself. In other words, when before a rocket ship takes off, 10, 9, 8, when you get to,
Right.
then it takes off. The countdown refers to the spaceship. It doesn't refer to you. You may be waiting for that to happen, but when you're counting up towards something, then you're more personally involved. It's an event that I'm going to be involved in. I'm counting up towards Shavuos when I can symbolically re-accept the Torah again that was given on Sinai. The Jewish people were anticipating. They were counting up, not counting down. Again, it might be a minor difference in translation, but I think it's an attitudinal thing. We're looking forward to something in a more positive sense. And again, a countdown is when something else happens. Counting up is when you are involved in it yourself. It's something that you're going to do.
Like dema'alin b'kodesh v'lo moridim.
Correct. Ma'alim b'kodesh. In area like when we light the Hanukkah lamps, so we light them in ascending order. We're going up in Kedusha. So here we're getting closer and closer to Ma'amad Har Sinai. So we're counting up towards something. Again, grammatically, you can argue in both ways. But I think the counting up involves a more personal engagement with that which you are anticipating, if I can put it in those words.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I got to tell you, I never count down to Yom Kippur.
Well, it's interesting because you have the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, where we are counting towards Yom Kippur. And again, it all depends on how you look at it. If you look at Tshuva as a cathartic process that will free you to start with a clean slate, then you are looking forward to it. You are counting up towards it. It all depends on how you approach it.
Okay.
All right. If you look at it from that perspective, then you're counting up.
I'll try to remember that.
Okay. Keep it in mind. I'll remind you again.
Okay.
Anybody? Have a wonderful and meaningful Shabbos, and think about counting.
Thank you.
Wally, will I see you on Shabbos?
God willing, if it isn't raining, I'll be there.
Thank
And-
you.
Hope
You're
to see
counting up to Shabbos, right?
Yeah.
Have a great Shabbos.
A wonderful.
Thank you, Wally. Have a great
Okay.
Shabbos.
Have a great
Good.
Thank you
Shabbos.
all.
Thank you. Have a great Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.